When I was working on this talk outline, I asked myself, I said, what are the needs of Washington Circuit number 10? And, I realized, I don't know. So as I was thinking about the needs and thinking about what the circuit really needed, I decided I would speak with some of the friends in the circuit. So I spoke to some of the elders, some of the ones that are more experienced, spoke to some of the sisters to be able to find out how they felt about things, spoke with some of the new ones in the circuit, some of the lowly ones, some of those that are more, as we would say, spiritually involved or more prominent. And I got a variety of answers, a variety of suggestions of what the circuit really needs. So if you were giving this talk, if you had this responsibility to stand here today and say, what does Washington Circuit number 10 need, what would you say? Well, as I considered the situation, looked over the records, listened to all the comments and whatever that the friends made, as I gathered all the information that I could possibly gather, I found this to be the need of Washington Circuit 10. That is, we need deliverance. We need deliverance out of this wicked system of things. You see, we need to get out of this old system of things, and we need to get into God's new world. Some way, somehow, we have to be able to negotiate this system. Some way, somehow, we have to survive this system of things. We must have the courage, the strength that it takes to be able to face this system that Satan is so much in control of. We need deliverance out of this wicked world. We need to have the strength to do like our theme of our assembly says, and to not give up, to not lose our hope, but to stay awake, to stay strong, to be able to stay involved in Jehovah's service until we can serve Him the way He deserves. Really, as I was thinking about the situation, I guess all of us, our situation could be described by the following scenario. If you could just follow along and see if you don't think this is the situation. So if you could picture yourself in the front of a canoe, right up in the very front of a canoe, and you're in a very rough stretch of water. There's rocks looming up out of the foam and the mist, and the rapids are running, and you're trying your best to dodge these rocks and to make it through this bad situation. The person behind you is supposed to be able to help you to steer the craft, and you find out they have very little experience. They don't know what they're doing either. On top of that, you don't have a map. You've never been here before, and you don't know if this rough stretch of water is going to end in a nice, calm pool somewhere, or if you're going to be thrown over a waterfall somewhere. Not a very pleasant scenario, isn't it? Isn't it true? We would need deliverance out of that type of situation. So let's change it. Let's say that we're in that same canoe, we're in that same situation, but the one behind you is a very experienced individual. You see, this individual knew ahead of time that this rough water was going to come. He knows every rock. He knows every bend. He knows every turn. He knows the waterfalls where they are. He knows exactly how this rough stretch of water is going to end. Would you not feel more secure with that type of situation? Now, really and truly, friends, each one of us finds ourselves in a very similar matter, very similar circumstances. You see, with no fault of our own, we find ourselves in a very rough stretch of human waters, as we'd put it. Very rough stretch of time. Do you realize that most people have no idea that how long things are going to be the way they are today? They don't have a clue what's going to happen. They don't know how this system of things is going to end. They don't know if it's going to be a waterfall, as it were, if it's going to be a calm pool of water. They don't have a clue. However, you and I do not have to feel hopeless, or we do not have to feel that we're not receiving the help and the guidance. And the reason is that Jehovah has provided us with that guide. He's given us that person, as it were, in the back of the boat to be able to guide us and direct us. He's given us just exactly what we need. As a matter of fact, did you know the help that Jehovah's given us has foretold this rough stretch of human history? This guide knows exactly everything is going to happen, knows all the rough water, where all the rocks are, where all the waterfalls are, spiritually speaking. Jehovah has given us the guide to help us. And that guide is this book, the Bible. Turn with me, if you would, please, and notice that not only does Jehovah know how all things are going to work out, but He even predicted exactly this period of time that we're in. Let's go to 2 Timothy chapter 3. And notice what this guidebook said about the time that we find ourselves in today. And as we read this, again, we've isolated this before, we've discussed this. But friends, see if this does not sound like the rough stretch of human history that you're living in right now today. 2 Timothy chapter 3. Let's just start with verse 1. Hold your Bibles open. We're going to come back to another point. First 4 verses. Notice what it says. Here Jehovah's guidebook says, "But know this, that in the last days, critical times hard to deal with will be here. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, self-assuming, haughty, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, disloyal, having no natural affection, not open to any agreement, slanderers without self-control, fierce, without love of goodness, betrayers, headstrong, puffed up with pride, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God." Friends, does that not sound like the life that we live today? Does that not sound like rough waters, unsure waters, rocks hidden below the surface, waterfalls approaching, treacherous winds, difficult times? Is it going to get better? Is it going to get better in this system of things? Don't think so. Look at verse 13. Verse 13 says, "But wicked men and impostors will advance from bad to worse, misleading and being misled." So we as Christians, what do we expect in this system? What do we expect life's going to be like? Do you think it's possible? Could we expect that we as individuals and as Jehovah's people, can we expect to be attacked by Satan? Yes, absolutely. We know that's going to happen. Can we expect opposition? Yes. Can we expect Satan to try to trap us, even as individuals and as a group? Absolutely, yes. Is there a danger that we might be fooled by Satan? You know the answer to that? Yes. There's a real danger that we could be, as individuals, we could be fooled by Satan. So is it possible to negotiate this rough period of time that we live in? Is it possible to be able to survive this wicked system of things? Well, some would say in the face of all of those, all that opposition, all those challenges, that the answer is no. But you know what the answer is to that question? Is it possible to negotiate this rough system that we live in? Is it possible to survive? The answer is yes. Yes, it is. And the reason it's possible is because of the guide that Jehovah has given us. You see, if we read the guide, if we pay attention to Jehovah's organization, if we listen to the guidance that Jehovah gives, He's going to take us right between each rock, right down the safe water, right into this nice pool, as it were, of calm waters that we call the New World. Now let's look at that in the Bible. Isaiah chapter 30. You've read this before, but perhaps this text will take on real meaning in your life as we continue our discussion. Isaiah chapter 30. And just notice verse 21, and think about what it means to us as individuals in a very rough stretch of human history. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21. Verse 21, very simply, it says, "And your own ears will hear a word behind you saying, 'This is the way, walk in it, you people.' In case you people should go to the right, or in case you should go to the left." Do you see the guidance? This is the way. It's like that voice behind you. It's like Jehovah from behind you saying, this is the way you need to go. Go straight this way. Don't go off to the right. Don't go off to the left. This is the way to go. So the way we can negotiate this system of things, the way we can survive this wicked system that we live in, is if we listen to what Jehovah tells us. If we listen to the guidance that He's given us through His organization. But friends, that's a big if sometimes. You see, that puts the responsibility right square on our own shoulders as individuals. We must do our own part if we're going to survive. Now, we asked earlier, is it possible for Satan to trick us? Is it possible that he could manipulate your thinking? Is it possible he could make you think wrong on something and you would work very hard to go in the opposite direction of what's right? The answer to that is yes, it's possible. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story that illustrates our point. You'll be able to tell it's not a true story, but it sure makes a nice point. As we think about this situation, just to show how humans can be manipulated, how our thinking can be affected, I heard a story one time. It's kind of one of those once upon a time stories. Not true, but anyway. Once upon a time, there was a man who had worked for many years making a living, and he finally retired. And when he retired, he wanted to move to a nice, calm, quiet area somewhere. So he looked around and he found a nice home in an area, in a neighborhood that was very quiet, not much traffic, not much noise. Beautiful area, so he moved in there and he just loved it. Quite peaceful neighborhood. Until one day, a bunch of young boys from the local school came down along the street on their lunch break, and they had these big sticks in their hand, and they began to beat on the garbage cans out in the yard, out along the street. They just bang, 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 bang on those garbage cans, making all kinds of noise. So this man looked out the window. What in the world is that? He looks out there and he sees these boys, and he says, well, I have to get them to stop that somewhere. Now, how am I going to get those boys to quit beating on those garbage cans? They're just disrupting the peace and quiet. So he thought about it, and he thought about it, and then he decided he'd go approach them. So he walked out to the street, and they're out there beating on those garbage cans, and he walks out there, and he looks at them, puts a big smile on his face. He said, boys, I tell you, he said, you don't know how happy it makes me to see you beat on those garbage cans. He said, that just makes me feel so good. He said, it makes me remember when I was your age, when I was a youth, and all those wonderful memories just come back. He said, you know what makes me so happy to see you do that? I'm going to pay you $1 an hour to come down here every day and beat on those garbage cans. Well, those boys kind of happy. You know, they're doing what they want to do, and they're going to get $1 an hour now for doing it. So every day those boys would come down and beat on those cans, and he'd pay them $1 an hour. This went on for a couple of weeks, and so finally one day he walked out there and he said, you know, he said, I'm really disappointed. He said, my retirement money is just not going as far as I want it to. So I can no longer afford to pay you $1 an hour. I can only afford 50 cents. Well, they got a little bit upset and said, okay, we're enjoying this. 50 cents an hour is better than nothing. Yeah, we'll beat on these cans. We'll keep, because they kept coming down beating on the cans. A couple of weeks later, he went out and he said, boys, I don't know what I'm going to do. He said, my finances are just not as good as they should be, and said, it's difficult. So I can no longer afford to pay you 50 cents an hour to come down here and do this. I can only afford 25 cents an hour. Well, these boys got all upset and looked at him and said, who do you think we are? You think we're going to spend our time come down here and beat on your garbage can for a lousy 25 cents an hour? We quit. See how that happens? That was easy, wasn't it? And that was a man that did that. Now, friends, it just goes to show us that humans can be manipulated. Now, the next important question is, are you a human? You're not going to say no to that one, I can tell you that, see? So the point is this, if a man could manipulate the thinking of another human, if he could cause a person to lose their focus and to go against what they were wanting to do in the first place, what do you think Satan could do to us in this system that we live in? How in the world do we protect ourselves from that? See, it goes back to what we said earlier. We need to listen to what Jehovah says. Don't you know that Satan has watched us? He's stalked us. He's figured out, he's already determined just what it is that's going to catch our attention, just what it is he's going to use against us to be able to cause us to take the wrong moves or to do the wrong things. He has already figured us out. Now, Jehovah also knows what we need, and he's figured us out is exactly what we need to keep us going the direction, not off to the left, not off to the right, but straight down the path. Now, just to give you an example of how Satan tries to manipulate us, turn your Bibles to 1 Timothy chapter 4. You'll see this very clearly as we discuss it. 1 Timothy chapter 4. This is one of the warnings that Jehovah gives to keep us on the straight and narrow path. And we can see that Satan is certainly using this today. He's trying to usurp this to be able to get us to do what he would like for us to do. Notice the warning, 1 Timothy chapter 4, what Satan would try to use. Verse 1. Here God's Word says this. However, the inspired utterances say definitely that in the later periods of time, now when do we say we live? Last days, later periods of time, some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to misleading inspired utterances and teachings of demons. This scripture says that in the later part of time, that the demons would be teachers of what's wrong. That they would try to teach us, individuals, to do what Satan would want us to do. They would like to teach us, especially our children in today's world, to respond and to listen and to serve Satan and the demons. Now you say, how do they teach? Well, there are many ways, but one way you'll recognize readily, one way that they teach today is through the entertainment world. Have you noticed that? Now, we're not going to go through a bunch of different movies and books and stories and things like that and tell you which movies to watch and which books to read, etc. We're not going to do that. But, friends, I think you have to realize and you have to admit to yourselves that the very nature and content of some video games, some computer games, toys, media programs, that it is absolutely necessary to realize that the content of some of those games and toys prove that the teachings of the demons are even aimed at our very young children. Have you noticed? Very young children. And those of us that are not as young as we used to be. Satan is using the demons to teach things that are wrong. You see, these books, movies, and games, and etc. teach the very opposite of what Jehovah's guidebook says, what the truth is about matters. Scriptural teachings about love, respect for authority, proper use of power, the condition of the dead, all of these things are regularly distorted and contradicted through the media, the games, and the videos and things of that nature. Have you not realized that movies and videos and books today feature things like spiritism, violence, immorality, and life after death, and other demonic teachings? See, these are things that are prevalent today. These are practices that are prohibited among God's people. Now, why are they prohibited among God's people? Because these are practices that God's enemy, Satan the devil, and the demons use to try to draw us away from true worship. These are things that Satan uses to try to manipulate us to think things like spiritism and violence and immorality and afterlife and all that kind of stuff is proper. We must be careful. I have a letter that a concerned parent wrote the Watchtower branch and asked about certain movies and books and videos and what have you. The ones you're thinking about right now, probably. The Society's comment was rather interesting, and you can see why they would say this. They said, first of all, we're not going to name books and movies and what have you, simply for this reason. Two reasons. One is, you and I need to be mature enough to make our own decisions. Isn't that true? Instead of being told everything. But secondly, they said, we do not view or read those books to find out if they're good or not. That would be disaster, wouldn't it? So they don't go watch these demonized and immoral movies to see if they're demonized and immoral. You know, I mean, it kind of makes sense, you know. But when they did comment about the nature of these, they said this: thus, when it comes to entertainment that focuses on witchcraft, it is wise to consider what the Bible has to say about such activity. In being entertained by such practices, a person could open himself up to being influenced adversely by an aspect of spiritism. Rightly, Christians shun every form of spiritism, whether it's for fun or if it is real. Then they said this: of course, there is a difference between actually engaging in spiritism and in watching or reading about it. Yet, even such watching or reading can present spiritual dangers. For instance, why are such practices prohibited among God's servants? Because they are practices promoted by God's enemy, the devil, and his demons to draw away people from the true worship of Jehovah. Moreover, fascination with such activities may be viewed by the demons as an invitation to communicate with or even possess the individual. If God calls each of these practices a detestable thing, how could a Christian be pleasing to Jehovah if he's reading or watching fictitious stories recounting the exploits of practicers of these things? What a powerful question. Could this soften one's attitude toward spiritism, perhaps even excite an interest in such craft? There have been sad experiences where Christians have become involved in practices of spiritism as a result of having their interest piqued by viewing such entertainment. Becoming fascinated with ideas associated with spiritism can weaken the spiritual armor that we need to fight against wicked spirit forces. The mature Christian, one more statement out of another paragraph, the mature Christian, by exercising his Bible-trained conscience, should have no difficulty in discerning what form of entertainment are acceptable. See, that's our responsibility to be able to do that. So we ask you, parents, are you aware of what your children are reading or watching or what kind of games they're playing? Do you know for sure whether or not they are inadvertently being taught by the demons? Do you help them identify the differences between what Jehovah teaches and what the demons teach? Satan is after your children. Satan is after us. He would love to devour us. The responsibility of mentally regulating children rests squarely on the parents. The Bible puts it directly on the parents, not on the children. Now, children have a responsibility. They're not freed from that, but we as parents have the responsibility to mentally regulate our children. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, it even squarely puts that responsibility on the father or on the spiritual head of the family. We have the responsibility as adults, as parents, to help our children choose their entertainment. We cannot, we should not allow our children to make those decisions without our oversight. Now, why is that such an important statement? Have you realized that we as adults have a hard time making the right decision sometimes in these matters? Have you realized that we even have a hard time deciding what's good to watch and what's good to read and what's not sometimes? We have a difficulty. Now, how in the world could we ever decide that our teenagers and younger could make those good decisions all by themselves when we have that difficulty? Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 says, we must safeguard the figurative heart. That is what we are, what we're made up of, how we think, how we feel. And friends, we must safeguard how our children feel on the inside. Now, another responsibility that comes to a parent is this. Can you imagine the frustration that a child would have if a parent professes hatred of what's bad, but yet the parent then is entertained by that? That puts a responsibility back on parents, not only to give the right direction to their children and to the congregation and to the others that we're trying to help, but we must set the right example. We must make the proper selections ourselves. So parents need to realize this, that children follow an example much quicker and much better than they actually follow instructions. Now, I think I can prove that to you. Children follow your example quicker and better than they do your instructions. Now, to help us with that, you'll have to go along with this. You have to play along, okay? Hold up your finger in the air like this. Hold your finger up in the air. You have to do this. Or my illustration doesn't work. Hold your finger up in the air. Now make a big OK sign out of it like that. You know what an OK sign is? Now put it on your chin. Is that your chin? You guys are good. You really are good. Yeah, I think my illustration made its point. Isn't that true? How many shocked looks there were? You know. Now, does that not make a point? See, friends, what we're saying is, some say, oh, Brother Fields, you fool me. I didn't fool you. I gave you one set of instructions and I set another example, and you went with the example. Isn't that true? Now, what do you think children do when we say, don't do this, don't do that, don't watch that kind of movie, don't read this kind of... And we do that. See what we're saying? So the point is this. If you want your children to be selective, if you expect your children to be selective in their entertainment, friends, we must be selective. And when I say we, it's not just mom and dad. Isn't it true in the congregation as mature Christians? We have a responsibility in the congregation to set the right example as well. We want our children to get into God's new world. We actually want each other to get into God's new world. Young or old, it doesn't make any difference. We want everyone to get into God's new world. Now, are we going to do our part until Jehovah's deliverance arrives so that we can all make it into God's new world? So what else will help us to be able to survive? What will help us to be able to get into Jehovah's world, to be able to survive this system until our deliverance arrives? Well, another thing that's very important to Christians is a matter of setting goals. Now, let me try to illustrate to you why it's important to set goals. And we're talking about proper goals. Not too long ago, a few years ago, we had a young man in the Pioneer Service School that was very excited, and his goal was to go to ministerial training school. You know, that's a school for young, single, not necessarily young, but younger, single elders and ministerial servants. And he really had his goal set going to that ministerial training school. However, during the course of the Pioneer Service School, he also told us about his plans to get married 2 weeks after the Pioneer Service School was over. Now, is marriage a good thing for a Christian? Well, absolutely. It's Bible-directed. It's a fine thing for Christians. It's a good goal. Unless, of course, your larger goal is, or your ultimate goal is, to go to a school that's only open to single brothers. Now, you know, it presents a problem, doesn't it? Now, my point is this. We have the goal, we've all been talking about, our goal is that we would get into God's new world. We'd be able to survive this system, get our deliverance into God's new world. But have we inadvertently set some other goals that in themselves may not be improper, may not be wrong, but they also might prevent us from reaching our ultimate goal? For example, you know what some of them are. There's nothing wrong with education. But have we set our goals on secular education to the point that it might get in the way of reaching our ultimate goal of getting into God's new world? Have we perhaps selected a career that will take so long to plan and to educate ourselves and be able to reach that career that we don't have time for the kingdom? The career, the job may not be bad. It may be a very nice job, maybe a rewarding career, but would it get in the way of kingdom interest? Or maybe we've set some other goal that in itself there's nothing wrong with, but it may just get in the way of our being able to reach our ultimate goal of getting into Jehovah's new world of paradise. Now, on the other hand, are there goals that we might set that would help us to reach our ultimate goal of salvation, deliverance? Well, yes, there are. As a matter of fact, there are a list of them, and these are some of the things that you friends mentioned that the needs were for Washington Circuit number 10. So you may recognize some of these as your thoughts as well as to what we could do to help us reach our ultimate goal. Some of them are, for example, are we regular in the field ministry? Now, regular in the ministry for a number of years has meant that we would be out each week, that we are regular, we're weekly in the field service. Now, by the way, that's spelled W-E-E-K-L-Y, in the field service. Are we out on a regular basis? Number 2, do we attend meetings without fail? You know what that means. It's our custom to be at congregation meetings and to benefit from those meetings. Do we keep up with our reading of the Society's publications? What about our reading of the guidebook itself that Jehovah has given us, this book, the reading of the Bible itself? Now, we're talking about picking it up and starting at page 1 and reading all the way through it to the end of it. That's what we mean when we say Bible reading. Are we doing that on a regular basis? Have we set a goal for each month in field service for the rest of this service year? Have we already done that? Have we selected which months will be in the Auxiliary Pioneer service, for example? Or even have you given serious consideration to the regular pioneer work? You know, all of these spiritual steps, all of these things that we're talking about are things that will protect us, will direct us, will help us to be able to reach our ultimate goal of Jehovah's new world. Now, some say, oh, no, I can't pioneer or whatever, so it wouldn't be right if I tried to pioneer because I don't have the circumstances. Friends, if you don't have the circumstances and you develop the pioneer spirit, that is, a desire to do all that you can do in Jehovah's service, how do you think Jehovah would feel about that? Would you think he'd love you because you wanted to pioneer even though you couldn't? Yeah. Would it be good for your spirituality? Yes. What if you couldn't pioneer, you didn't have the circumstances, and you didn't want them? How do you think Jehovah would feel about that? Well, you change your mind about that thinking, isn't it? You see? So you see the point. Can we develop that attitude or what we're doing? Bottom line is, are we doing everything that we can do to rejoice in the hope and endure under the tribulation? Are we doing everything that we can to keep our minds on the fact that Jehovah knows this rough stretch of water we're in? He knows exactly what's going on. He knew it before it ever happened. He knows how it's going to end, and He knows how to get you and I through that. What can we do to keep our minds fixed on that? What can we do to keep remembering that there's a voice behind us? There's someone in the boat behind us. There's someone directing the craft. Jehovah is saying, as Isaiah put it, there is a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it, you people.